Bailouts among the wealthy aren't forged in boardrooms. They are negotiated in dining rooms, weighed in leverage, and paid for in bloodlines. The fabric tore with a sickening rip. My sister, Monique, tossed the heavy shears onto my mattress. She had just slashed my only decent dress right down the middle. I reached for the ruined silk. Monique grabbed my shoulder and shoved me hard against the bedroom doorframe. The sharp edge of the wood dug into my spine. "Are you delusional?" she hissed. She leaned in close enough for me to smell her expensive mint gum. "You think I'd touch your garbage? You are a leech. You could wear Chanel and still reek of the hired help. Get downstairs and clean the mud off the porch." Aunt Brenda stood right there in the hallway. She watched Monique walk away. She watched the blood welling up on my bottom lip where my teeth had clamped down. Brenda just let out a long, heavy sigh. "Please," Brenda whispered. "Your father is stressed about money today. Why are you so selfish? Just let your sister vent. Family comes first." I wiped the blood off my chin with the back of my hand. The metallic taste coated my tongue. The concept of family died right there in that hallway. At 24, my official title in the Addams household was daughter. My actual job was unpaid servant. Tonight, the dining room looked like a stage play of fake wealth. Crystal glasses caught the dim light. The silver was polished to a blinding shine. My father, David, sat at the head of the table. He was sweating through his custom suit, desperate to secure a $2.5 million bridge loan to save his collapsing real estate empire. Marcus Baker sat opposite him. Marcus was 32, a reclusive tech investor with a faint scar above his jawline and eyes that looked utterly exhausted by the noise. He did not look like a man easily fooled. Next to him, Danielle and Monique were putting on a sickening performance. Danielle leaned over his shoulder, quoting business articles she barely understood. Monique laughed too loudly, tossing her hair and touching Marcus's arm every chance she got. I carried a heavy silver tray of appetizers from the kitchen. My father snapped his fingers, pointing at the empty space next to Marcus. I stepped forward. Monique stretched her stiletto heel right into my path. My ankle hit her shoe. The tray tipped. I threw my weight backward, barely catching the porcelain plates before they crashed onto Marcus's lap. Hot grease splattered across my bare forearm. Before I could even catch my breath, my father's hand clamped around my wrist. His fingers dug into my bruised skin. He twisted my arm hard enough to send a shock of pain straight up to my shoulder. "You useless brat!" David hissed through a clenched jaw. His eyes were wide with pure rage. "I feed you, and you can barely walk straight. Get out of my sight. Don't humiliate me again." He released my wrist with a violent shove. Marcus stopped looking at Danielle. He stared directly at the deep red marks blooming on my skin. I swallowed the humiliation, wiped the grease from my sleeve, and walked back to the kitchen. 10 minutes later, the air in the dining room was thick with desperation. Marcus rubbed his temples. "Just bring me a black coffee," he muttered. Monique immediately jumped up. She scrambled to the bar, mixing some ridiculous, sugary espresso cocktail to show off, clinking ice, and shaking glasses. I walked straight past her. I slid a heavy, steaming French press directly to Marcus's right hand. No sugar, no milk, no nervous apology. The dark liquid poured flawlessly into his cup. Marcus picked up the mug. He took a sip. His dark, tired eyes met mine. He saw exactly what I was. A survivor trapped in a room full of predators. He set the cup down. The heavy thud silenced the room. He turned to my father. "I will fund the $2.5 million, Marcus said. His voice was low, scraping the bottom of his throat. My father let out a desperate, wheezing breath of relief. Monique smirked. "But," Marcus continued, cutting through the celebration, There is one condition. Erica holds the master authorization for the disbursement account, and she leaves with me tonight to run my estate as my chief of staff. The dining room went dead silent. David's fake, rehearsed smile completely fractured. Monique dropped her cocktail glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor. Nobody moved. I stood by the mahogany table, looking at the man who had just handed me the keys to my own cage. I shoved my few remaining clothes into a faded canvas duffel bag. Downstairs, the screaming rattled the floorboards. I slung the heavy strap over my aching shoulder. Before leaving, I needed the only thing in this house that actually mattered. My mother's silver watch rested on the kitchen island. I walked down the hall. Monique stood by the marble counter. She dangled the silver mesh band from her perfectly manicured fingers. Her eyes locked onto mine. A cruel, deliberate smile stretched across her face. She dropped the watch straight into the sink and flipped the switch for the garbage disposal. The horrific screech of metal grinding against metal tore through the kitchen. The sound vibrated in my teeth. Sparks shot up from the dark drain. "Oops," Monique sneered. She crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "Looks like trash belongs with trash." Aunt Brenda sat right there at the breakfast nook. She stared intensely at her coffee cup, pretending the deafening noise of my mother's only heirloom being shredded wasn't happening. My jaw locked shut. A cold, heavy weight settled in my stomach, replacing every ounce of lingering pity. I turned around and walked out the front door. The bailout paperwork required my final authorization. I sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's SUV, the blue glow of my laptop lighting up the dark leather cabin. I knew my father. I knew his blinding arrogance. He considered reading fine print an insult to his ego. I typed out the contract. I buried a lethal cross-default clause deep on page 12. The terms were absolute. If the $2.5 million were used for anything outside of strictly approved business operations, the entire corporate debt immediately transferred to David and Monique's personal Social Security numbers. They would become personally liable for every single penny. I emailed the document. 3 minutes later, a notification flashed on my screen. David signed it. He swallowed the poison without checking the label. The Blue Ridge Mountains were draped in freezing fog when we arrived at Marcus's off-grid compound. The sprawling stone architecture looked like a brutalist fortress against the pines. Inside, the silence was profound. For the first time in 24 years, the constant ringing in my ears stopped. Marcus and I worked side by side. We audited ledgers, managed his portfolios, and shared quiet cups of black coffee by a roaring hearth. He valued my intellect. He never asked me to shrink myself to make him feel taller. But I kept my tablet on my desk. I was waiting for the trap to spring. It took exactly 3 weeks. The financial alerts lit up my screen on a cold Tuesday morning. The first red flag was an $80,000 wire transfer to an offshore gambling site under David's name. The second alert was a massive swipe on the corporate card. Monique had just purchased 3 designer luxury bags and a first-class ticket to Dubai. They violated the contract. They thought they were untouchable. I picked up my phone and dialed the bank's executive line. "Execute the default protocol on the Adams account," I said. "Are you sure, ma'am? This will immediately initiate federal collection on the personal guarantors." "Do it." I set the phone down. The avalanche was already falling. The heavy oak door of my office smashed open. David and Monique stormed past my assistant, slamming a leather binder onto my glass desk. "You froze our cards. You ungrateful bitch." David screamed. The veins in his neck bulged against his tight collar. "I am your father. Unfreeze the accounts immediately, or I will drag you out of here by your hair." Monique leaned over the desk. She sneered, tapping her manicured nails on the glass. You really thought a little corporate title would stop us from putting you in your place. I tapped a single button on my keyboard. The massive wall monitor flared to life. Bright red IRS seals and federal bankruptcy notices illuminated the entire room. "I haven't frozen your cards," I said. My tone was dead flat. "The federal government did. You signed a personal liability clause. By gambling the corporate funds, you assumed the $3 million debt personally." The color drained instantly from David's face. His knees literally buckled, dropping him heavily into the leather guest chair. Monique lunged across the desk to grab my throat. My security detail stepped forward and instantly pinned her arms behind her back. Her cheek smashed against the cold glass. The destruction was just beginning. That evening, David tried to maintain his crumbling facade. He put on his tailored tuxedo and attended the annual country club gala, sipping champagne and lying to his elite investors. My phone buzzed with a live video feed. My legal team was already waiting at the club. Right in the middle of David's arrogant toast, the heavy diesel engines of 3 tow trucks rumbled onto the pristine valet lot. Uniformed repossession agents hitched up David's silver Bentley and Monique's Mercedes. They dragged the luxury cars away in front of the entire gala. The elite social circle crowded the terrace. Whispers erupted instantly. The Addams family's fake empire was publicly, humiliatingly dismantled in real time. David stood on the country club steps, his champagne flute shaking violently in his hand, completely stripped of the only thing he actually loved. They went quiet for a month. Then, a massive blizzard swallowed the Blue Ridge Mountains. The power grid failed. Believing Marcus's compound was vulnerable, desperation drove my family to absolute madness. They bypassed our frozen main gate and shattered the glass of our underground server room, intending to destroy the hardware to extort us for ransom. They cornered me against the towering metal racks. "You're just a maid," Monique screamed, her face contorted with freezing, desperate rage. "You are nothing without us." They laughed at me when I was sweeping their floors, but they never realized I spent those years learning exactly how to build a cage they couldn't escape. I pressed the master override switch on the wall. The backup generators roared to life. Blinding white emergency lights flooded the room, illuminating every drop of melting snow on their coats. The heavy steel blast doors slammed shut, locking into place with a definitive, inescapable thud. Marcus stepped out from the corridor, blocking their only exit. The arrogance vanished from my father's expression. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead despite the freezing air. Monique's jaw trembled. Her eyes darted wildly around the sealed room, tracking the thick steel walls. The sheer, suffocating terror on their faces marked the exact moment they realized the girl they had abused for 24 years was now the one holding the leash. The state police did not arrive instantly. The blizzard buried our access roads under 3 feet of heavy, dense snow. Institutional justice moved slowly, and the weather dragged it to a crawl. We left them locked in the server room for 6 brutal hours. The ambient temperature in that enclosure hovered just above freezing to protect the hardware banks. Marcus and I sat in the security control center, watching the high-definition camera feeds. David pounded his bare fists against the reinforced steel door for the first hour. His face twisted into an ugly, entitled mask. Then, he resorted to screaming empty threats. By hour 4, the cold broke them. They huddled together on the bare concrete floor, shivering uncontrollably. The heavy diesel engines of the police cruisers finally rumbled through the snowdrifts just before dawn. Flashing red and blue lights cut violently through the whiteout conditions, casting long, frantic shadows against the stone walls of our compound. 2 state troopers hauled my father and sister out into the freezing wind. Handcuffs clicked sharply over their bruised wrists. David wept openly. His tears froze instantly on his flushed cheeks. He babbled wildly to the officers about his real estate empire, his country club memberships, his untouchable legacy. The officers ignored him, shoving him into the back of the cruiser. Monique stumbled through the deep snow, shivering violently in her ruined designer coat. The venom was completely gone from her eyes, replaced by hollow, wide-eyed terror. Felony breaking and entering, combined with corporate extortion, carried a massive mandatory minimum sentence in this state. The next morning, sunlight hit the mountain, reflecting blindingly off the fresh powder. My phone buzzed on the kitchen island. A text from Aunt Brenda lit up the screen. "Erica, please, you have to drop the charges. Your father's health is failing in that cell. We are family. You have ruined them over a simple misunderstanding." I stared at the glowing pixels. A year ago, that text would have triggered a panic attack. I would have rushed to apologize. Today, the words were just pathetic, hollow noise. The audacity of her cowardice was staggering. I tapped her contact name, scrolled to the bottom of the screen, and hit block. I deleted the entire thread. The last fragile tether tying me to the Adams bloodline vanished into the digital trash. Danielle's fate sealed itself shortly after. Without the corporate accounts to fund her pseudo-intellectual lifestyle, reality crashed down hard. Her luxury apartment lease was terminated by the bank. Word reached me that she was working a minimum-wage retail shift at a suburban strip mall. She was forced to smile and fold cheap sweaters for the exact type of working-class people she used to openly mock. Back in the main hall of the sanctuary, the massive stone hearth crackled. Marcus walked into the room, holding 2 heavy ceramic mugs. He handed me the dark, bitter tea. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't demand an emotional breakdown. He just sat beside me, his shoulder pressing firmly against mine. We looked out the towering glass windows at the unbroken expanse of white snow. Complete, absolute peace filled the compound. I took a slow sip of the scalding tea. I used to think I just wanted to survive the storm. Looking at the ice forming on the glass, the truth settled deep in my bones. I didn't survive the storm. I became it. The heavy wooden gavel struck the sounding block. The sharp crack echoed through the federal courtroom, finalizing the absolute destruction of the Adams empire. The judge did not care about my father's previous country club status or his tailored suits. The sentencing was brutal and exact. David received 9 years in federal prison for corporate fraud and embezzlement, compounded by the extortion charges from the compound break-in. The court ordered him to pay $3,200,000 in direct restitution. Monique stood beside him in a shapeless orange jumpsuit, her designer wardrobe entirely gone. The judge sentenced her to 6 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole only after serving 4 full years behind bars. The social execution happened even faster than the legal one. The elite circles of Charlotte completely erased them. The country club revoked their memberships the morning after the arrests. Former friends and wealthy investors pretended they had never even met David Adams. The sprawling McMansion was seized by the bank, liquidated at a foreclosure auction to cover a fraction of the remaining debts. The fake empire simply dissolved into dust, leaving absolutely no trace of the power they used to wield over me. 7 months passed. The brutal winter surrendered to a bright, vibrant spring across the Blue Ridge Mountains. I walked down to the estate's main gate to collect the mail. Wedged between vendor invoices and local flyers sat a cheap, thin envelope. The return address bore the official stamp of the North Carolina Department of Corrections. Monique's letter was a masterpiece of pathetic manipulation. She complained about the food and the beds, then delivered the inevitable echo of toxic entitlement. She forgave me for putting her there, reminded me we were blood, and demanded $500 for her commissary account. Because family takes care of family. A year ago, that letter would have paralyzed me with guilt. Now, I walked straight to the fireplace and tossed it onto the logs. It turned to ash in seconds. I walked into the kitchen. My pulse never spiked. My hands remained perfectly steady. Indifference is the ultimate weapon against a narcissist. My life on the mountain became a sanctuary, insulated from the outside world's screaming demands. Marcus and I shared quiet mornings, strong black coffee, and mutual respect. He never raised his voice. He never demanded I shrink myself to inflate his ego. We built a chosen family up here. The locals respected hard work, not designer labels. When we sat around the dinner table, the laughter was genuine. The air never felt heavy with unspoken threats. I finally experienced a home where I didn't have to constantly earn the right to exist. I used to believe a dangerous lie if I just kept my head down and absorbed the insults. My abusers would eventually recognize my worth. That is the greatest illusion we tell ourselves about toxic people. Let's dissect what actually happened. David and Monique didn't hate me because I was useless. They hated me because my silence held a mirror up to their empty noise. Narcissists don't want a relationship. They want a stage. And they demand you play the audience. The second you refuse to clap, you become the enemy. Then you have the Aunt Brendas, the enablers. They weaponize peace to disguise their own cowardice, demanding the victim absorb the abuse so they don't have to hold the abuser accountable. When you finally leave, they won't admit they lost a good person. They will scream that you betrayed them. Let them scream. Surviving that house taught me 3 laws of human nature. Rule number 1, blood is a biological fact. Loyalty is a behavioral choice. Society weaponizes the word family to keep victims locked in cages. Sharing DNA does not grant anyone a VIP pass to disrespect your boundaries or use you as a punching bag. If a stranger treated you like your toxic relatives do, you would have called the police years ago. Stop giving emotional discounts to people bankrupting your soul. Rule number 2, you can never outlove a person's entitlement. To an abuser, your sacrifice isn't a gift, it's what they are owed. When Monique destroyed my mother's watch, it was a test. They will push your boundaries until your spine snaps. The only way to win is to refuse to play. You don't argue. You strategize. You build boundaries so strict that the moment someone crosses them, they destroy themselves against your walls. Rule number 3, peace is not the absence of noise. Peace is the presence of an anchor. Marcus didn't save me, I saved myself. But he recognized the value of my silence. Don't look for a partner who wants to join your chaos. Look for the person who sits beside you in the quiet, hands you a black coffee, and stands shoulder to shoulder with you when the blast doors lock. The hardest part about walking away from toxicity is the silence that follows. When you've spent your life in a war zone, peace feels terrifying. You sit in your new, safe life, constantly waiting for the next slap or demand for money. But eventually, the snow settles. You take a deep breath and realize the silence is no longer empty. It is yours. Look closely at the people sitting around your dinner table. Are they actually feeding you, or are they just waiting for you to serve them if you stopped pouring the coffee tomorrow? How long would it take for them to turn on you? I am Erica, and I am free.